just the quality of some of this gear. I used to hear about it before I started at Leigh, and there's such a sort of mystique about who the hell is Leigh Fish and what do they do, and now that I've kind of got the key to the door, it's still just as exciting.
This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. I'm John Susman. A brand is an intangible marketing concept that helps people identify a company, product, or individual. People often confuse brands with things like logos, slogans, or other recognisable marks, which are marketing tools that help promote goods and services. David Ogilvy, the godfather of advertising, defined brands as the intangible sum of a product's attributes. It's what it delivers and how it makes people trust a product. For an industry which is so reliant on trust as a means to build and maintain business, the fresh, wild catch seafood sector has few known brands. There are fewer still that generate as much agreement about what defines quality when it comes to fresh fish. New Zealand wild catch fishing company, Leigh Fish, is regarded globally as such a definition of quality. Leigh Fish is as much a story of provenance as it is quality. It's the story of a town, its people, the Pacific Ocean, and their daily hunt for the best fresh fish. Leigh is a small coastal community located approximately 100 kilometres northeast of Auckland, New Zealand. Tom Searle is the general manager of Leigh Fish. Educated, erudite and passionate about the water, Tom's story echoes the ethics and commitment of Leigh Fish.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Tom Searle. I'm the manager up at Leigh Fish. We're a little fishing village located about an hour and a half north of Auckland on the east coast of New Zealand. Yeah, so Leigh Fish has been around a very long time. We're dating back to 1957 when there was a group of fishermen fishing out of the harbour in Leigh itself, frustrated with the port prices they were receiving down in Auckland, and so they got together and bought a piece of land and started smoking their snapper and selling it to Auckland themselves. And then we fast forward 20 odd years, and before you know it, they were exporting almost everything they caught. So it's always been around chilled product. So we very much keep the fish whole and put it on an airline. We don't own any vessels. All of our vessels are owner operators. Most of them have fished to Leigh for a long time, so we don't sort of review our fleet annually, anything like that. It's very much we're working with people that have supported us long term. So there's about probably about 25, 30 of us all up between the factory and admin, and we're in finance and management, and we're very everyone's got to be prepared. It's very flat management structure. If you're short of staff, you just put your boots on and get out there and pack some fish. So it's rather than having like formalized, meetings between the marketing manager and the production manager and this guy and that guy and sitting around on Zoom all day. It's more you're having those ongoing conversations through the day because all of that information's held within sort of two heads on site. So it's quite refreshing in that respect, is that there's just no, everyone's treated the same. We're all just one big team.
Like many in the seafood industry, Tom's career was an extension of his love for the water. Like most male Kiwis, his heightened sense of the hunt drove him to pursue this love, led to study, travel, and eventually employment, all centred around the marine environment.
I sort of grew up just crazy about fishing, making my own little lures as a kid, and just every story I wrote or poem I did or whatever I had for school projects, it was always my speech was on the different methods of fishing and the different species. And was fortunate enough to grow up with my grandparents having a batch at Tutukaka, which is sort of an hour and 2 hours from Leigh here, further north on the coast out from Whangarei, and it's a sort of the world's gateway to the Poor Knights Islands, the Poor Knights Marine Reserve, which is sort of Jacques Cousteau's top 10 in the world dive sites, as well as a real game fishing mecca. So my grandmother, she held the men's and women's all tackle striped marlin world record for 11 years. From a couple of years before I was born, she caught that. So we've sort of got the head mounted on the wall there, and there's various other pescatarian bits and pieces hanging off the walls, and it's very much a fishing sort of place in town. And my earliest memories are that was just always the place, just the excitement of getting up there. And so that sort of followed me through really, where I I went down to Otago. I grew up south of Auckland, out in Papakura and Drury, and went to study in Dunedin. Ended up doing a master's in marine biology down there, and sort of focusing on the aquaculture side of things with paua, or black abalone. And then got on the road, did my OE, based out of London, usual sort of Kiwi way, and there via Asia and back via Africa, and had a real good look around, and actually got a job at the London Aquarium. Was as close as I could get to seafood in London, and but they were paying sort of peanuts. So I went out building. Dad's a builder, so I've always worked for him over the years, and had a couple of years out of the industry. Prior to that, actually looked after some leases, an oyster farm at some oyster leases on Waiheke Island for Clevedon Coast oysters for Callum. Then, that was a good school holiday job for me as well. And then I came back and, ended up scoring a job with Sanford, working at the Auckland Fish Market. And, before long I was sort of running the Auckland Fish Market, the tenancies there in the auction, and had sort of 4.5 years there, just learning a lot about the fishing industry and building relationships and getting to know a lot of the people that I'm still dealing with today. Then an opportunity came up there was a factory manager position advertised at Leigh, and I just happened to be down in Wellington at Te Papa at the annual seafood conference, and someone mentioned it to me. It was sort of 9 o'clock at night after quite a few beers, and I raced back to my hotel room as I heard it was closing that night, and just flicked through a little placeholder to say, hey, I'll have my application through tomorrow. And the rest is history. Really ended up at working for Leigh Fish. Certainly coming from the big corporate side of the industrial catching and those sort of methods to something completely artisanal and small vessels and one crew. And it took a while to get my head around, because I was super excited, but I was also trying to work out why it was 15 knots easterly, not much different to what I'd take my little tinny out in, and we didn't have fish, and then once you start understanding the scale of the size of the vessels and how close to shore they fish and how often they come back to port daily and that sort of thing, it was a complete shift for me. But I think just the amount of care that went into it, and the longevity of the relationships, and how long people have worked alongside Leigh, and the people we had sort of that Greg had lining up to who wanted to fish to Leigh. It was a real sort of aspiration. So that just made you feel really proud. So right from the beginning, I felt like I'd sort of come home. Really, it fitted so well. And then in the last 18 months, I've sort of become the GM there, and very much for me, it feels like morally and ethically, it's the pinnacle of the New Zealand industry in terms of the way we sort of care for our product, and the relationship we have with the environment, and the whole sort of Māori worldview of kaitiakitanga. And so very, very excited. We're building changing a few things around, building quite a fresh, young, exciting team, and I think got a really, really bright future.
The Japanese infatuation for fish quality has had a global influence, not merely on cuisine, but the catching, handling and supply of fish. It's claimed that Japan gave birth to a wide variety of now worldwide fish catching and handling techniques. The forefathers of Leigh Fish saw how these Japanese techniques could vastly improve the commercial return for their catch, and sought counsel from Japanese fishermen to develop the longline fishing technique in New Zealand. Aside from producing the best quality versus other methods, longlining is also the most sustainable catching method and has the least impact on the environment.
So Leigh's been very much built on the catch method of longlining. It's still far and wide our most of our catch is caught by hook and line, and that's what we celebrate. That's what we think is the best way to catch a product and keep it in the quality that we maintain. Back in the early 80s, or probably mid to late 80s, when the Japanese market was just hotting up for us, the Japanese actually came out to Leigh and got on boats and spent time with our fishers, who some of which are still with us, and others that have retired and left their vessels now to their sons and moved through the generations. But the Japanese came out and taught our guys exactly how they wanted the fish handled, and the whole process of ikijimi, the traditional Japanese way. right through to slurrying and packing and handling, and the absolute care that they put in the product. And then, we at that point in time, probably late 80s, early 90s, I think 90+% of Leigh Fish's longline catch, which was, we were 100% longline at that point, was all going into the Japanese market. And then after a while, that was sort of 2 days a week fishing, small volumes, high grading, sort of quota management system. The guys were at the pub the rest of the week, sort of making more money than the doctors and dentists for 2 days a week work. There was a lot of money flowing around, and the sort of prices they were getting then are probably 4 or 5 times what they're getting now. However, that was unfortunately short-lived. Japanese came out with some country of origin legislation, labelling legislation, whereby they were actually relabeling the fish clearly marked as New Zealand fish as their own and selling it that way. And so that combined with the Japanese economy moving the wrong direction meant that market dried up very, very quickly, so we had to diversify.
The world of seafood is constantly changing. Market demands vary by season, by market, and by species of catch. The winds of change can blow hard and fast in the seafood industry, demanding a nimble business model that can adapt quickly.
That was certainly a process. It went from needing to be really creative really quickly because of the speed at which the Japanese market sort of stopped working out for us and stopped being an option. So, the Leigh Fish USA was formed up in LA. So Richard Adlam, who heads that up, he came across from New Zealand Seafoods and formed a joint business with Leigh Fisheries at the time, which we're now called Leigh Fish. So it was a sort of half and half shared arrangement. And then same sort of model up in Europe with Daniel Christian, based in Zurich, and he looked after that region. And then Australia, we've tended to work with the Paulos boys down the eastern seaboard, and they do a great job for us there. So it's been very much the loyalties are really key value for us. The people we work with, rather than dealing with, for instance, 10 different wholesalers in Sydney, we're dealing with one, and we give them the power of that exclusivity, but we expect a lot back from that, and we want them to champion our story and our product. And same goes up in the offshore markets, up in LA and across in Zurich and Vancouver and Canada and the rest of the other corners of the globe.
The longline fisherman is a true hunter of his catch. As well as the fishing practice being low impact, the actual longline vessels themselves are smaller. Therefore, there's less environmental effect as the boats are low horsepower and much more fuel efficient in their operation. Longlining allows skippers to fully control and monitor their fishing practices. When certain areas are yielding smaller fish or non-target species, the fishers can easily reset their gear elsewhere and work other grounds.
The guys on a normal, I guess we'll start with a standard day for a longliner, so they'll get up very early in the morning, depending a bit on the moon phase and tides, etc., as to when they think the best time to set is, because with longlining, obviously the fish have to be feeding. It's quite different to most other methods where if they're there, you can scoop them up. So there's a lot of hunting involved, and so we do find that the guys are pretty very clever when it comes to targeting a smaller snapper around Chinese New Year or a larger snapper for some other particular market sort of want or need. So they'll head out early morning, set their gear, which takes a good few hours. They'll set between 1,000 and 4,000 hooks these days, sometimes 500. And then they'll have a cup of tea and steam back to the start, and then start picking that line up. So as the fish come aboard alive, they'll brain spike them, ikijimi the fish, so they're killed instantaneously and put into a slurry, so a mixture of salt, ice, and water, to try to get that core temperature down to close to zero as quickly as possible. Even that, there's a bit of an art to it. You can overdo it and wash out the good colour in the fish and sort of overdo it and give it wide eyes, but you also want to get that gut really, really cold, so the enzymes and bacteria aren't burning through into the good flesh. Then it's lifted out and placed in. We use the little what we call icky bins, just the really small fish bins you see around. They're only sort of with ice and the bin, you're only talking 15 kilos, so they're really small units with a lid on them. So the smaller size unit you're handling, the better you can care for your product. And then they just go into an insulated fish hole below deck. And the guys, if they're catching well, they'll stop and pack their fish, and then carry on with fresh slurries. Otherwise, they might haul their whole line, and then they'll be back in port that afternoon. So if they're further offshore catching, you targeting mixed species, so your tarakihi, your morwongs, and your trevally and scorpion fish and blue cod and red snappers and things, then it's a lot longer days, or often they'll stay out at an offshore island or in a harbour overnight. But when they're doing the regular inshore fishing, which is the majority of our catch, they're just out there for literally the day. And as they come into port, we have a truck meet them and lift that fish off and bring it back to Leigh through the night. So depending, boats are fishing anywhere from Tauranga in the Bay of Plenty through to Hohora in the far, far north. So it's very much the upper North Island and the east coast. So yeah, we have a fleet of trucks that are owned by a separate contractor, and they work through the night to get the fish in our chiller by sort of 3:30 in the morning, and then the processing team's there from just before 4, and our main sort of whole pack line from 5. So generally we're working to airline cut-off, so we may have to have a truck leaving Leigh at 7 or 8 in the morning with, for instance, the Naples or the Cyprus order. A lot of the European flights tend to have earlier cut-offs to meet connections through Asia. And the graders are packing, that they're looking at a list to see what boat's got what product, and they'll know from their own experience and from the previous days who's got the right colour snapper for the more discerning market, etc. And what happens is this flows right the way through to how we pay the vessels. So rather than them getting an A or a B port price and having them make the ugly decision of sort of quality versus quantity, they can see on their pay advice for that specific unload, there might be 15 different prices that make up their average on the snapper. And so if they're taking more care, targeting a better fish, they'll get a much better average price. So the whole system encourages excellence. Our graders have have both worked on the water before and have a lot of experience. They'll often be able to look at a fish and tell straight away why it isn't perfect, why the way it's been handled. Or you might have a cheeky deckhand who puts an icky hole in the head of a fish that's actually drowned on the hook, and they just see straight through that. So there's a lot of IP in the brains of the staff on site. So they've actually, like I'm sort of new kid on the block, and I've been there like 11 years now. So it's incredible how long and how again, it's just that same value of loyalty and longevity, that the staff sort of really care for what they're doing and really proud of their work.
Wild caught seafood is enjoying a renaissance of appreciation for just how special it is. As the global supply of wild fish becomes less, so too has corporate interest in the sector increased, especially from those for who security of supply of great quality wild fish is an imperative. Yeah,
that's right. It's been certainly quite a big step change for Leigh Fish. So we've gone from being a privately owned company until coming up 2.5 years ago, when we went through a quite a long-winded sale process and ended up with Foodstuffs North Island, which is the large supermarket owner cooperative in New Zealand that look after, they own the Pack and Save New World Foursquare stores. And so we were, if I go back slightly further, we're jumping around a bit here, but we'd be around the barbecue, you're chatting with mates, and we're constantly getting having those conversations where people would sort of put an oar in and give you a bit of stick and say, well, come on, mate, you're just like those lamb wankers, you're putting all the good stuff on a plane out of here, and us Kiwis can't access it. And that never felt quite right. So we started delving in food service. I think probably Leigh Fish NZ is our food service business, and they were formed about 8 years ago, I believe. So then before long, we sort of had 300 restaurants on our books, and longline fish is expensive, so it doesn't quite work for the fish and chippy or most of the bistro outfits, but it's more of a fine dining sort of white tablecloth by the time that to make that price point work. So before we knew it, we had 42 of the Metro magazine in Auckland puts out a top 50 restaurants once a year, and we had 42 of those 50 on our books within the first 2 years, and then we're sort of supplying well outside of Auckland from the top of the north to the deep south. So we felt really proud about that. And then we've sort of, the transitions continued where we're actually now a retail brand. So with Foodstuffs buying us more recently, as I said, 2.5 years ago, we're now selling our product to Kiwis. It doesn't have to be a special occasion, a wedding anniversary at the French cafe to be able to access Leigh fish. You can go to the local supermarket and our whole fish is on offer there.
Seafood is a global business. The big annual seafood shows in Boston, Brussels and Hong Kong are incredible showcases of pretty much everything and anything that swims. Through the oceans of wet, cold, sometimes smelly and slimy exhibits, it's hard to stand out. However, there's one exhibit which has become a beacon of excellence at all of these shows. The Leigh fish display holds cult status amongst the tens of thousands of attendees at the seafood shows. For some, the sole reason of attending is to marvel at the quality of the fresh fish which has come from the most remote corner of the planet.
Yeah, it certainly blew my mind getting out of Leigh for the first time. The first show I went up to was the Hong Kong one, which is obviously much smaller, but just the fact that every single person, it seemed, in these huge exposition halls wanted to get a photo by it, and we'd always have a huge moonfish there, the big blue belly with the white spots and the red fins, and back at the factory end, we'd always stitch up the guys, whoever was lucky enough to go with the show, and find the biggest one of the day, and send a 50 or 60 kilo beast up there for the guys to kind of get up at 5 a.m. and lug it and set it up on the display after being out all night entertaining customers. So it's a lot of fun. And yeah, it's same went for Boston. I was just absolutely blown away to get that global perspective, because Leigh's a pretty small town, and so I've sort of travelled fairly widely through an OE and things, but not necessarily with my seafood lens on. So to get up there and see how widely regarded our product was in the offshore markets just really, really blew my mind. I was fortunate enough to dine at a sashimi restaurant called Sugarfish in Manhattan in New York with Miles from Leigh Fish USA, when the two of us were sort of on tour on our way from there across down to New York and back to Boston. And so that just completely blew my mind, eating our snapper raw in Manhattan a couple of days after it had come out of the ocean somewhere up in Leigh. And the guys there were just as excited as I was about it. It was just incredible to see the enthusiasm for it, and so often we're getting texts which are relayed through our sales teams around the world asking, sorry, he's chucked the box away. He wanted to know who was the guy who caught the blue nose again, and where did he unload it, and what's the skipper's name, and getting these photos back of blackboards which really just that true my own version of the definition of provenance, where it says, today's gurnard, fish of the day's gurnard, it was unloaded in Tutukaka yesterday, and the skipper's Jacob Drake, and caught on the vessel Bonadir. Just really really gets you going. It's fantastic.
The Leigh fish business is a story of respectful evolution, their ongoing, unrelenting commitment to preserving the fisheries resource. Combined with the rigorous New Zealand quota management system, a key to the Leigh fisheries story is their ability to trace fish back to its origin, with each box carrying the fish's name and boat from which it came. Leigh are at the forefront of driving authorities to improve the data library of catches to assist in managing the ongoing sustainability of their fisheries.
The quota management system, or the QMS in New Zealand, certainly is by all accounts is world leading. I think we've definitely been a bit complacent in recent years, whereby we've been saying that for the last 15 or 20 years, but we haven't really moved ahead as quickly as some other nations. So I'd say now we're in a group of others that are doing it just as well, if not even better now. I think the biggest, in terms of stocks, we're doing well, particularly the stuff that we catch. We don't get involved in any of the deep water fisheries and things, so I sort of can't speak for them. But I think that the real challenge is that we're very information poor because science costs so much money. And in New Zealand, a lot of the science process, the vast majority is funded by industry. And so in the inshore, when you're dealing with such a range of species and such small volumes really versus the say like the roughy or the hokey fishery. Snapper's only 4,500 tonne of commercial catch, and they estimate that recreational catch in snapper one fishery that we operate in is 4,000 tonne, but we don't really know. And so, I've been working with MSC for years now to try to get them to look at a company certification for the way we catch fish, and specifically for snapper. But there's just such a massive void of a massive gap in the information. That means we've got a lot of work to do there. And I think particularly and I wear both hats. I get out spearfishing all the time and fishing, and love taking my kids out on the boat. So I feel like I can say this confidently, but I'd be more than happy to have a simple app where I logged my catch, and you could have a $50 fine at the boat ramp if you hadn't done it. It'd be as simple as that. But it's sort of a bit of a political hot potato, and the government doesn't really want to face up to getting a grasp of how much is being taken out recreationally, even though commercially we have a really good understanding. And if we could bring all of that together, obviously we could manage our fisheries much, much more closely. The future for Leigh's is extremely bright. I think, that we're still in a position where we've had more snapper catch this last 2 years than we've had for the last probably more than 10 years, just in terms of relationships with iwi and other private quota interests. And so we've got slightly more access. However, we're still in a position where our demand massively outstrips our supply. We only own about a third to a half of the quota we need to sort of spin the wheels each year. So there's so much capacity there. There's so much room for growth, but we're so constricted. And I think that the demand for good quality protein, but particularly with the story and the proof of traceability and provenance is just, it's just ever growing. And so, I think we're placed really, really well there. I think we'll always do a blend, despite what some people thought when foodstuffs first bought us and thought that, the export would get shut off. I think we've just got it. It's a nice sort of hedging mechanism, having our finger in all markets, and that whole dynamic of the offshore high value stuff helping out with the pricing domestically. And I think that's probably that balance will continue into the future. And we're very excited.
Like all hunters, fishing yarns can be long and many. Fishermen by nature are enthusiastic hunters and will forego common sense to chase the best fish.
Maybe 3 years ago, I was fortunate enough to go up to the Three Kings Island, which are off Cape Reinga, sort of 50 mile north of the tip of New Zealand, with my uncle and cousin on his launch. And I'd sort of gleaned a whole lot of info I could off a couple of the commercial skippers, and they'd done some homework. And between us, we felt like we had some intel, but we were running fairly blind. And anyway, it was just an absolute trip of a lifetime. We caught a whole lot of big bass and kingfish and so on, and then I'd kind of planned to get up there and do some spearfishing, knowing that everything's just supersized up there. And the time I got there, the water was it was really cold and dark and just airy, and there's lots of great white stories up there. And so I was sort of wasn't jumping straight on in, and my younger cousin just said, "Oh, come on, I thought you were the spearfishing guy, you better get in." So suited up, got in the water, and within 5 minutes had a 44 kilo kingfish on the end of my spear, and fight of a lifetime. So that was certainly was one I'll never forget.
The Leigh story can be broken down simply. It's all about care. Sustainable fishing, respectful handling, packing and grading, all in the shortest time possible from boat to customer. The outcome of this labour of care, whether it's in a kitchen in Auckland, Sydney, New York, Zurich or Hong Kong, is that nod of absolute respect from a chef who realises that he's using Leigh fish.
I think for me it's the people. I spend these days I spend most of my day on the phone, and sometimes you think, oh shit, that hasn't been a very productive day, but those relationships, and particularly there's more of that at the moment than there is face to face for obvious reasons with the COVID carry on. I think the relationships, whether it's a staff member or a quota owner or an iwi partner or an airline or a freight forwarder, we've just got such a massive raft of amazing people, and they're all just as important as the next in terms of making our whole model work. And I think that's probably the key thing for me. And I also just love getting my boots on and actually, seeing and handling product and things. I don't do it anywhere near as much. If someone listening to this from the factory might give me a bit of stick on that comment and for the last year or so, but generally that was that's definitely been a real focus of mine, is just getting in up to your armpits and just seeing that the colours and the quality of some of this gear. I used to hear about it before I started at Leigh, and there's just such a sort of mystique about who the hell is Leigh Fish and what do they do and where are they even located. And now that I've kind of got the key to the door, it's still just as exciting.
Leigh is the story of a little fish who made it big in the global ocean by simply caring. This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. A Deep in the Weeds production. I'm John Susman. Follow us on Instagram at Fishtales Seafood Podcast or email us at fishtalespodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay tuned for more tales from beneath the surface of the seafood world every Friday on your podcast app.